Hey everybody, welcome back to Battlestar Galactica Remembered. And recently I did a video talking about Richard Hatch, right, and his efforts to bring back Battlestar Galactica. And I said at the very end there that he was successful in a way, although Universal didn't give him the rights to do a new Battlestar continuation. But what they did do is ultimately, we're going to talk about that today, in early 2001, it was announced that Universal did give the franchise to Tom DeSanto and Bryan Singer of X-Men, the whole X-Men series and all that kind of stuff. It was very big. They released the X-Men movie in the summer of 2000. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And the fact of the matter is that they were going to bring it back as a continuation, very similar to what Richard Hatch was doing, actually. And so there's going to be two parts to what we're going to talk about today. The first one is, okay, well, what happened with all that? With them getting it and this and that, and well, ultimately, why didn't we get to see their program, right? And so what happens is that in the summer of 2000, I'm sure they must have heard a lot of what Richard Hatch was doing and all of that, but Richard didn't get the franchise from Universal. And so during the story goes that Tom DeSanto has talked about this, that during a press junket trip, for X-Men in the summer of 2000, he and Bryan Singer were on a plane, and Tom DeSanto puts in Battlestar Galactica. He starts watching it. And Bryan Singer goes, oh, hey, Battlestar was one of my favorites also. So they started talking about it, and they started, kind of wondering. And they said, I guess with everything that Richard Hatch had done, they said, you know what? Let's go in and let us make the pitch for Battlestar to see if we can do it. And so they do, apparently, sometime at the end of 2000. They did. Tom DeSanto said that Bryan Singer went in and made the pitch, because Tom DeSanto wasn't available at that time. And I even have the date for you. On February 22nd, 2001, Universal announced that Tom DeSanto and Bryan Singer were being given the project to bring back Battlestar Galactica. But here's the thing. Tom DeSanto was very clear. He said this was not going to be a remake or anything like that. It was going to be a continuation. He was going to bring back original characters. He was going to continue the storyline. Very similar, by the way, to what Richard Hatch was doing. And that's going to be the second part of what we're going to talk about. Well, what would we have seen with that project? It's very interesting. Well, anyway, by April of 2001, the official go-ahead is given. And they start pre-production in Vancouver, Canada. Tom DeSanto wanted it done in LA, but because of production costs and it's cheaper and all that, they decided to go to Vancouver, Canada. They start building sets. They were building the bridge. They were building two Vipers and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to put up some pictures here of what we can get off the internet and what's available out there. Designs and all this kind of stuff that they were doing it. They were bringing it back. One real interesting thing was that Dirk Benedict and Herb Jefferson were signed to be on it. They were going to be colonels. And in fact, Starbuck was going to be the second in command of the Galactica. So it was set to be pretty cool. I mean, this is what we were hoping for. Shooting was going to begin in November and continue on through early January. And ultimately what happened was that Fox Network was the one who was going to air it. And it was going to come out as a 2-hour pilot movie in May of 2002. That's when we were going to get it. It was a backdoor pilot in hopes that they would pick it up as a series. And Tom DeSanto has said that they mapped out like a 3-year arc, a 5-year story arc in case it went to series and they would go ahead and do it and produce it and all that kind of stuff. And it was all set. We were hearing about all of it throughout 2001. We were getting pretty excited. And what happened? Well, I mentioned briefly in that last video that I did. What happened was 9/11. And of course, here in the United States, that means so much to us, obviously. And what happened was with the 9/11 attack, right, everything ground to a halt. All travel, everything, it was surreal for those days and weeks afterward. And so Tom DeSanto, what happened was that the delay pushed beyond a month or so. And then once that happened, obviously Bryan Singer could not stay with the project. He was by that January, he was already going to be going into pre-production of X-Men 2, which was going to shoot, later the following year and all of that. And so Bryan Singer had to, get out of the project. He couldn't do it any longer. Tom DeSanto has said that there were other feature directors that wanted to do it and they were going and whatever. And in his mind, he was just going, okay, well, we've been delayed, okay, but then we're gonna get back to it. Fine, we'll get another director, and that'll be it. Maybe, okay, we'll push it to the fall of 2002, something like that. And so that's how it was, right? So he was kind of on hold, working it and all that kind of stuff. And then by the spring of 2002, it was announced that Fox all of a sudden was pulling out of the project. Why? Because they all of a sudden announced that they were going to be backing Joss Whedon's Firefly show. And Tom DeSanto has said that when he heard that from Fox, that he knew, we're in big trouble now because Fox is going to go with that. They're not going to go with us anymore. And we were in big trouble. And that's what he was kind of worrying, very much so. And what ultimately happened was that in early April, and some articles have kind of said that, unbeknownst to Tom DeSanto, by the way, kind of maybe behind his back, that's what these articles have said, that basically it all of a sudden was announced that Universal was giving Battlestar Galactica to the Sci-Fi Channel and Ron Moore, and that they were very deliberately going to take it in a totally different direction, a reimagined show right from the start. And that was it. Early April 2002, in the old timeline, we would have been 1 month away from that continuation. It would have been amazing. Can you think of the trailers and the commercials and all the stuff that would have come out? Oh my goodness. But instead, we get the announcement that no, it's going to be a total reimagining in a total different direction. And I mean, that was it. I remember hearing that. I remember at that time, and it was just absolutely devastating. I mean, we were going from that continuation that we wanted to a total reimagining. It had nothing to do with the original show. A totally different show, just called Battlestar Galactica, right? And that was it. And so that's what happened. And, I don't mean to make light of everything that happened with 9/11, of course. But, one other little tiny casualty of 9/11 was our Battlestar Galactica continuation. I mean, if you kind of think about it that way, and like I said, I don't mean any disrespect to anything that happened there and to the people that lost their lives. But, as we think about it, 20-some years later now, it cost us that Battlestar Galactica show. And I know it pales in comparison, but yeah, that's what did happen, unfortunately. We didn't get the Battlestar continuation that we wanted because of all the delays and everything that had occurred and that it caused. All right. So that's what happened. That's kind of the timeline of how they got it for about, a year there, started production, but then 9/11 happened and threw everything out of whack. And that was it. By the following spring, it was over. Fox and everybody else moved on, and they gave it to Sci-Fi Channel instead. Okay, so now, what was that idea gonna look like? What was that project gonna look like? Remember, it was gonna be a 2-hour movie to kick things off. And so basically, the plot synopsis, I don't wanna go too much into detail. There are some wonderful websites out there. You can look up, Tom DeSanto, Battlestar Galactica. One of them, by the way, if you really wanna read up a lot on Battlestar Galactica, really cool stuff and interviews about the revival and all that. There is a wonderful, it's an archived website now, but it's called Tombs of Kobol, just all together, Tombs of Kobol. I'll see if I'll put in a link down below in the description. And they have archived stuff of not only Battlestar, but all kinds of other sci-fi shows too. But when you go there, click on Battlestar, and then you can go into like all the different incarnations of it, the new show, Galactica 1980, revivals, there's interviews, plot synopses, all kinds of stuff. And if you really want to get into like what Tom DeSanto was going to do, you can go there and read into it. But I just want to kind of give you a very quick plot synopsis of what that was going to look like. And like I said, a lot of it was going to be very similar to what Richard Hatch was doing. And so basically, the storyline goes in the very beginning, it's like a classroom scene. And basically, they're going over the backstory. You got to know the backstory. And what had happened was in the backstory is that right after, shortly after Hand of God, the Pegasus reappears. And the Pegasus and the Galactica engage in a huge battle with the Cylons, kind of the battle of all battles. The Pegasus is lost. We don't know, kind of it disappears again, right? And one of the major things that happens is that Apollo disappears. So Apollo has disappeared for like 20 years. And so what ends up happening is shortly after that battle, Commander Adama eventually dies. And what happens is that, believe it or not, now this one, I don't know how they were going to explain this, but Boxy grows up. He uses a new name, just like Galactica 1980, except it's not Troy. He was going to be called Orin, Orin. Orin, and that's Boxy. He becomes eventually the commander of the Galactica. And so what happens is they end up, they're going on, but without Adama and Apollo and their leadership, eventually what happens is they come across an asteroid belt that is rich in everything they need. And it's kind of hidden and all of that. So they decide to stop. They're done. They're not going to search for Earth anymore. And they start building new Caprica. And it's like, biodomes and pleasure domes and all this kind of stuff. And they just start living it up, basically. Because for 20 years now, they haven't seen the Cylons, that kind of stuff. Now, keep in mind, it's a very similar plot line to Richard Hatch's Second Coming trailer. Remember that. The Cylons had a civil war, and they hadn't been seen and heard from in a generation, and now they come back. Well, guess what happens? The female president, the civilian president, remember we talked about the nincompoops of the civilians? Right. Well, they want to decommission the Galactica. They want to get rid of the military, the same old thing. And at this time, lo and behold, what happens? Yes, the Cylons have been watching them. And the Cylons, and this is going to be seen in the movie. This is where the movie picks up right here. The Cylons attack and they're devastating them and they're going to destroy them and all that kind of stuff. And what happens is right at the crucial moment, the Cylons stop. And they say, okay, you have a choice. Come with us. We're going to take you back to wherever, Cylon or whatever. Or we're going to destroy you. And so basically the underlying premise of, well, why are they going to be taken about? Where are they going? Basically what had happened is that there had been this new technology where basically humans were being made, they implanted nanotechnology into the humans to make them kind of like human Cylons. They gave up their free will. And eventually it was said that although Baltar was not going to be in the pilot movie, they were going to bring him back in the series. And that basically he was the first one to undergo the procedure, to basically give up his free will, and he becomes like a human Cylon, if you will. So human Cylons, so that was another key concept there. And that was what they were going to do. Well, they make a trick maneuver and they send the asteroid careening into the base star and they destroy the Cylons and they get out. And so they then commence the search for Earth once again. And so that was the premise of the movie. And then, of course, the series was going to continue. And the very last shot was going to be very interesting. Is what was really kind of exciting, kind of wild and weird, but I think it would have worked. But you go back to the planet Cylon, and so you go to all the, he said that all you saw was Cylons and this and that and the robots and everything. And then you go into like these inner chambers, whatever, and then all of a sudden you start realizing that they're not the Cylons anymore. They're humans. And these are like these humans that they've been converting into kind of cyborg type people. And so what happens is at the very end, it pushes in, and the last human you see is Apollo. And it pushes in on his eye, and then deep inside his eye, you see the little Cylon light going back and forth. That Apollo, when he had disappeared 20 years before, had been taken in, and he had become a human Cylon. And so that's the storyline. That was going to be one of the major story arcs of Apollo coming back. And we had, Tom DeSanto had said, again, they had signed Dirk Benedict, Herb Jefferson. They were even talking to, Sarah Rush, having her come back as Rigel. Anne Lockhart was going to eventually come back with the Pegasus, in command of the Pegasus, by the way. And so we were ahead of that. We were already thinking, remember in our Callisto RPG, right? Who's Sheba? She's commander of the Callisto. So we were kind of ahead on that one. But she would come back with the Pegasus and all that. Of course, in the end, also what would happen is that, believe it or not, Jane Seymour was going to come back as a being of light. And she would help bring Apollo back. I mean, wouldn't that have been pretty cool? That was going to be the focus of the story as they continue searching for Earth and all that. Oh, man, that was what it was going to be. That's what we were going to. So that was the 2-hour movie and then the subsequent series. And so, like I said, this close. We were going to get it. We were going to get it. It makes me kind of upset and all that, man, that's what we were going to get. Instead, we got, the reimagined thing the next year, and I didn't bother watching it. But anyway, that was it. So that's the story of Tom DeSanto and Bryan Singer and Universal giving Battlestar to them and what their plan was. And so you can see it was very similar to what Richard Hatch was doing, and having the Cylons, be gone for a long while and come back and then have it play out after that. So I think it would have been amazing. Would have been pretty awesome. I would have been there every week had that series been produced. And we'd have a whole different history right about now. We'd have a whole, Battlestar second series that we'd be talking about now, years afterward, after it had come and gone as well. But it was not to be, unfortunately. So that's what we were going to get. That was Tom DeSanto's vision, and that's what was going to happen. But it all came for naught because of 9/11, unfortunately. We suffered through that the terrible tragedy, and because of it, unfortunately, we also didn't get Battlestar Galactica the way we wanted to as a continuation. But anyway, that was it. I hope you enjoyed this one. Long live Battlestar Galactica, and I will see you in the next video.